welcome back to Might Erase Later. Today we're going to talk about Blake Lively and the Justin Baldoni lawsuit. We all know the basics, the conspiracy theories, but the part that really intrigues me about all of this is the retaliation cause of action. So we've all gossiped about the sexual harassment, but the retaliation is separate and potentially much more damaging to Justin and his team. So to kind of recap a little bit, right? December 20th, 2024, Blake drops the bombshell complaint. A couple days later, we get the actual lawsuit. Justin sues the New York Times, right? Justin sues Blake and Ryan and all their friends and their publicists and everything. The Justin Baldoni lawsuits have been dismissed without prejudice, which means he can go refile, but right now he is not suing them. So right now the only cause of action, the only lawsuits that are actually pending are the sexual harassment lawsuit and the retaliation lawsuits against Justin on behalf of Blake. Now there's 13 causes of action in there, and they're about split between sexual harassment and retaliation. So, we've all talked about the sexual harassment one, right? For months, we've all been talking about this. And, to be honest, those claims are terrible, right? I mean, when we first read them, if half of them are true, it's disgusting. And nobody should be subject to that at work, in a professional environment, even a creative environment. They should not be subject to that. But that being said, let's switch and talk about the retaliation part. Because the retaliation part is potentially much more damaging from a financial aspect and the fallout of, future jobs and all of that. And so when we look at the retaliation, really what it comes down to is, regardless of whether the sexual harassment was true or happened, once Blake Lively made the complaint, once she went to Wayfair and Sony and the union and said, hey, I've been sexually harassed. Once she did that, she became protected against being fired, retaliation, right? Demotions, all of those things. She became protected against them until they did the investigation and they kind of came to a conclusion. And they never did. So if true, right, if then all these other people came out and they were like, we're going to damage her, we're going to go after her, we're going to make people hate her, then she wins. She wins the retaliation lawsuit. And when we think about this in non-celebrity, non-millionaire world, what we're really talking about is you work in an office, a young girl works in an office, she gets harassed by her male boss, she goes to HR and complains, HR's like, okay, we're gonna do an investigation, and then he goes and gives her a terrible performance evaluation, right? He goes and starts talking about her and telling her that she missed deadlines and starts making up arbitrary things to get her fired, to get rid of her, or to discredit her. You can't do that. And, we don't want you to do that. As a society, as people that work in professional environments, we don't want that to happen. We don't want a big white, the white man to come down and tell a little girl how she has to behave and how she has to get in line. And so when we look at retaliation, it's a very, good law, right? It's necessary. But, a lot of times the law was written to protect those without a voice and without power. And so sometimes it's hard to look at something like this when you're talking about celebrities. You look at somebody like Blake Lively that is rich and powerful and an A-list and famous. It's hard to say she doesn't have a voice and she doesn't have power and we need the law to protect her. But at the end of the day, that is what the law is there for. The retaliation laws are written to protect anybody in this situation. That once you make a complaint about your boss, about your coworker, about your environment as an employee, until that investigation is complete, you can't be fired, you can't be demoted, you can't get a pay cut. And as society, we want those laws in place because eventually they may protect all of us. So for this, Blake Lively made a complaint. And what happens next? And I really think this is going to be a jury question of what happens next. Blake made this complaint. We have the premiere, and then everything comes out, right? All over the internet, all of a sudden is all of the complaints, the sexual harassment, everything of, how all this, Blake was subjected to all of this and how awful it was. And immediately, right, when that comes out last December, it was Blake is terrible. She made it all up. They were discrediting her. And I say they, social media influencers. Everywhere online, every article that was written was, one more example of what a mean girl she was. So the real question comes down to is, where did all of that start? How did we start talking bad about her? Was it plans from Justin's team? Was it just a slow news week and a bunch of people started to look up old interviews and, Google's amazing, right? You can find anything on the internet. And did all of a sudden these little tiny things start popping up and people just organically went online and were like, hey, remember about the plantation wedding? Right? All of those things, did they all just kind of pop up? And it had nothing to do with Justin's team. It had nothing to do with them trying to go after her. And was it organic? And I do think that is truly going to be a jury question, because I don't think that he can and his team can ever admit that they did that purposefully, because it's malicious. Like, I don't know if he's ever going to recover from that. And, is she ever going to back down from saying you guys did this? Because in reality, it happened. All of those things happened. The world turned against Blake Lively. The world was like, we're done with you. So it comes down to, where did Justin's team have a say and did they start to spark that internet conversation about her and all of her faults? And so I think that's going to be interesting. So that is going to be in May. That trial is May. Right now, the latest, right, she's subpoenaing everybody, trying to get all these social media influencers, all these talk show hosts, right, to give the text messages to her, because she's trying to prove that Justin reached out, right? That, did Justin's team reach out? Did these PR people ask for anything? The creators that I've seen have all absolutely denied it. And nobody told me to talk bad about her. I just did. So we shall see. It really is going to come down to, 12 people sitting in a box saying yes or no. The timing is a little suspicious, right? She sues them for, she starts making complaints about sexual harassment. All of a sudden, everybody hates her. Was that the timing? Was it just his team trying to protect him but not go after her? Who started to leak it first, right? As we know, she went to the New York Times. Is that where it ended? Is that where it started? I think there's a lot more to come out. I think that PR is a crazy game, and I think that there's so many aspects of it, of, the crisis management, the PR, the marketing, right? All of those pieces are complementary. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of that on Justin's side. What was Wayfair? What was Justin? What was crisis? him just hiring the crisis managers before anybody knew about sexual harassment claims, did that set people off? And maybe that's all it took. Maybe it was a spark and it wasn't intentional. If it was intentional, it's gonna be really bad. She's not asked for a dollar amount. Blake Lively has asked for the court to make that decision, but she has said, in her complaints about, it's the loss of future work, right? And I'm sure that they're going to say that, right? Her brand has taken a hit. How many people are buying Blake Brown Beauty? Right? No one's buying that shampoo, okay? And are we not buying that shampoo because every review says it's terrible? Are we not buying that shampoo because, nobody wants to support her? A Simple Favor too. Did that movie not make as much money as it should have because nobody wants to support her? Or is it because nobody understood Simple Favor 1 and we just can't do it? Who knows? Her emotional distress, she has been totally hiding out. All of that will come into play. That will be another decision, even if Justin Baldoni and team are, found responsible for the retaliation. What's the damage? Is it fair to say that it's nothing? Yes, they did it, but you didn't actually lose anything. Or it could be tens of millions of dollars saying, yes, you did. You lost opportunities. You lost your standing in Hollywood. All of that has a financial price to it. So we shall see. We will have updates as they come, but we definitely look forward to trial in May.